I'd like to certainly say how pleased I am to be participating in this launch of the Barbados Broadcasting Authority's public education campaign. We've been working on this for some time. This particular campaign was conceptualized and organized by, as you heard, he introduced himself, the BBA's Public Relations and Public Education Subcommittee that is chaired by Peter. I'd like to place this initiative by the BBA within the broader context of the evolving digital environment in which we are operating, and that includes digital sovereignty and interdependence, content and cybersecurity, and content regulation. In my capacity as chair of the Barbados Broadcasting Authority, I was also elected to chair the International Institute of Communications Small Nations Regulators Forum. And there are a number of issues that impact us as small nations that consume our attention. I thought it was important to place this campaign within the context of those issues. So I'd like to begin with the evolving digital environment. So we're aware that the origins of the internet were seen mainly in terms of functionality and growth and market development. But now it is ideological, and it is subject to increasing political pressures. This will have a profound effect in the coming years, and the Barbados Broadcasting Authority has made representation for the Broadcasting Act and regulations as they currently exist to be updated to meet that future. Digital convergence is resulting not only in telecoms companies getting into content, but technology service providers operating at the telecommunications level. This convergence creates complexities in many areas, from DNS protocols and cybercrime to content issues like hate speech and disinformation. And traditionally, governments have turned to telecoms regulators to deal with these issues. These require an understanding of the difference between telecoms and the internet and the content. For example, in smaller countries like ours, without the capacity to develop new regulators, computer emergency response teams tend to be the body with the responsibility for cyber incidents, but they're often placed within the telecoms or another regulatory authority. So that brings me to the matter of digital sovereignty. This matter of digital sovereignty and interdependence reminds me of John Barrow, what he declared the independence of cyberspace in 1996, way back. He described it as a unique space in which governments were not welcome and would be allowed no control. Well, 25 years later, we are in an age of interdependence in which the UN has called for cooperation in areas such as an inclusive digital economy, human rights, trust and security, and institutional capacity. So interconnectivity means that the same standards are being pursued globally, and the internet needs to be maintained as a single space. But yet, there is an issue of digital sovereignty as well. Many countries treat the localization of national data as a policy priority. We're no exception. We have our own Data Protection Act of 2019. And so we look forward to the draft Cybercrime Bill 2021 that is currently being discussed with support from the Octopus Project of the Council of Europe. So whether that's good or bad, it will result in a fragmentation of the digital access. And so it brings me to content and cybersecurity. So the world has not traditionally had to deal with this combination of politics and negotiations around content, certainly not in the last few decades. But now there are huge challenges for social media policies that can address issues of disinformation, hate, cybercrime, and the dark web without crossing the lines of human rights, free speech, and broader freedoms. It's very hard to balance these at a national level, but harder still when taking into account global relations. Arguably, there is no such thing as cyberspace or an offline life. Everything is connected, and everything can be hacked. Increasingly, the targets are critical sectors of society, such as energy and healthcare. Closer to home, in Costa Rica, they were locked down for months in a ransomware attack that was supposedly criminal. But countries are openly developing offensive cyber capabilities, many with unlimited resources and political will. So, businesses everywhere, right here in Barbados, now need to take account of all of this in their threat modeling. Managing those risks, managing all risks, now have to put this at the top of the heap. This is also influencing the adoption of standards. So there are battles over whether human rights should be embedded in new internet protocols, or whether they should include more sovereignty and control. Emerging technologies mean that policies need to be future-proof, and there is a lot of buzz right now around the metaverse. The BBA thinks the best way to look at this is to consider the building blocks. Blockchain, AI, augmented reality, or quantum computing. What are the building blocks that can't be seen? And what impact will they have on the metaverse? What are the implications for us in Barbados as we proudly own one of the first embassies in the metaverse? So my final area for context of this launch rests with content regulation. And content regulation is an area that always has a risk involved, because once we extend it into internet regulation, then there's the risk of censorship. There is a difference between regulating traditional broadcasters, which is what our current act allows for us to do as the BBA, and new media with a different modality, but which, in many cases, operate like broadcasters. We see it in the streaming of live video. And often these are viewed at a much larger scale and as quickly as traditional broadcasters. For example, the massacre in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019, it was live streamed and it was rebroadcast many times. That is arguably a much bigger issue than individual safety. But this is a thin line between content regulation and internet censorship. Because so much content is broadcast in jurisdictions over which a regulator like the BBA may have no control, there is certainly a need for better digital literacy. And so the BBA owns its responsibility, sees this as an important plank of what this campaign is as a first step towards addressing the digital literacy, the DQ of all Barbadians. Many problems exist in regulating speech online. Some jurisdictions are planning to update their regulations to include online content. But the reality is that certainly for many small nations like ours, most regulators, most bodies that exist, have few or absolutely no powers to impose penalties. And until our legislation is updated, neither do we. In Brazil, there is no specific regulation or regulator for internet content. But issues are dealt with through the courts. But the debate over regulating issues such as hate speech and disinformation continues, and I suspect it will continue for a long time. Therefore, the burning question remains: how can small nations like Barbados practically confront the major issues of the day, from data protection to cybersecurity and automation? These factors have consumed our attention at the Barbados Broadcasting Authority as we await our new legislation crafted to address these issues in an age of convergence. So bringing it home at the very local level, we know the fake news. We know the damage it can cause. A major concern for us at the BBA, because We have nowhere to hide. We're a very small society. So our launch of this public service announcement, this video, is a response to a national concern that is growing. It is a growing phenomenon that is most prevalent, of course, on the internet via social media. So we do urge you to think before you click and be a part of this campaign. Public education, rather than over-regulation, is what we see as the BBA as a preferred progressive approach in a converged media environment. We believe providing public education will better equip us as Barbadians to make informed decisions. It will provide more knowledge about your individual responsibility, as well as the rights and responsibilities outlined in the Computer Misuse Act of 2005. Think before you click is the campaign that is intended to do just that. The campaign concept and coordination were led by Peter, who has been very diligent in moving the idea to reality. So in the coming weeks, the video PSA will also be supported by a social media campaign.